WBC belt that has included Ali, the greatest of all time. They are set and ready to answer who's the greatest of right now. Wilder, Fury 2, here we go.
News to win, and having another stack of belts that I already own don't really mean shit to me. So rather than fight all these mandatories that he's got, I'd say just vacate those belts and fight the fight that everyone wants to see. You know, I ain't running from you. I don't care about you. I'll go through you like a hot knife through butter. So, you know, come and fight the big boy. Step up to the plate.
What Tyson Fury is advising Anthony Joshua to do isn't the least bit in keeping with a champion.
Nope.
What's expected of a champion? Oh, it's definitely in keeping with what you'd expect from Tyson Fury, who I told you guys many times in the past won't stand for ceremony.
Doesn't care about becoming undisputed.
Before Dillian Whyte was sparked out by Alexander Povetkin, when Dillian Whyte was still Tyson Fury's mandatory challenger, you guys saw what the talk was. Tyson Fury was on the verge of vacating that WBC title.
It's not my opinion.
That's not merely an observation or an anecdote. That's a fact. That's what the reports were stating at that time as Dillian Whyte continued to apply pressure to Tyson Fury to satisfy him as his mandatory challenger, and Tyson Fury was hinting at vacating the title, as the titles themselves, to him, have no meaning. So I don't think Anthony Joshua is of that mindset. Try and understand that Anthony Joshua is an Olympic gold medalist. Try and understand the competitive drive it takes to get to that point as an amateur. Look at Anthony Joshua's professional career, procuring 3 of the 4 major titles in his division only 5 years into his professional career. Only 5 years in, at a meager 20-0, who was Tyson Fury fighting 5 years into his professional career when he was 20-0?
Steve Cunningham.
Now, none of this is being said to chastise or castigate Tyson Fury so much as to characterize the different mindsets of these fighters. Tyson Fury isn't one to stand for ceremony, and he doesn't mind getting out of his responsibilities. He had a responsibility to Vladimir Klitschko to give him a rematch, and Tyson Fury absconded. He had a responsibility to give Dillian Whyte a title shot, and he wasn't too crazy about that responsibility either. So I don't expect Tyson Fury to be of the same mindset as Anthony Joshua, because Anthony Joshua does take care of his responsibilities. His responsibilities as a champion and what is in keeping with that. I mean, you don't see Tyson Fury talking about vacating the WBC title now, do you?
No.
Now that Dillian Whyte's not sniffing his trail, hot on it, pressuring him to give him a fight, you don't hear that kind of talk from Tyson Fury now, do you?
No.
But when he was in a situation or facing one where he would have to honor his responsibilities as a champion, we know what the talk was. Put simply, Anthony Joshua wants the same kind of glory that Tyson Fury does, but without the shortcuts. Because that's what that would be. I understand that there's a desire to see Anthony Joshua lock horns with Tyson Fury. I want to see that fight myself. It's just that Tyson Fury's methodology of getting to that point entails shortcuts, things that are not in keeping with what you would expect from a champion, and things that are not in keeping with Anthony Joshua's character. Tyson Fury wants to have things his way and have his pick of the litter whenever he so chooses. And that does not encompass the same difficulty level that is associated with being a champion and satisfying the responsibilities that come with being a champion, that you don't always get to pick and choose. You have mandatory challengers, guys who work their way up to the point to where you owe them a title shot. Now, one of those guys is Alexander Usyk, an Olympic gold medalist, the same way that Anthony Joshua is an Olympic gold medalist. If we're hearing this talk of Anthony Joshua vacating the WBO title, rather that he should vacate it so that he can fast forward to the Tyson Fury fight, it is in reference to Anthony Joshua's mandatory obligation to give Usyk a title shot.
That's what it's all about.
Essentially, it's a title defense, and it just so happens that Tyson Fury has never defended a single title he's ever held, in spite of having held all four, just at separate points in his career. After he beat Vladimir, he won 3 of the 4, didn't defend a single one of them, and he subsequently geared a comeback, won the WBC title after a couple of fights
Here and there.
from Deontay Wilder, and he has yet to defend that one. From the look of it, unless Tyson Fury gets to pick and choose who he defends it against,
And when.
he's not all that interested in defending it at all.
That's how he operates.
And you really can't expect to be thought of in the same light as Joe Louis, a guy who defended his heavyweight title, 25 times? You can't expect it to be thought of in the same light, the same scope as a Larry Holmes, who defended his heavyweight title, his heavyweight crown, 19, 20 times? Tyson Fury hasn't defended a single title he's ever won once. So, of course, he's going to advise Anthony Joshua to vacate a fragment, a piece of his heavyweight crown that he has worked so hard to get at, because Tyson Fury is not of that mindset. Tyson Fury wants the glory, with the shortcuts. Anthony Joshua does not. So if I'm being honest, I'm not going to chastise Anthony Joshua for taking care of business. Why would I? That's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. He's a champion. Champions have mandatory challengers, and sometimes those mandatory challengers are quite formidable, like Alexander Povetkin was, Anthony Joshua's WBA mandatory challenger. That victory has aged quite well, as here today, not only is Alexander Povetkin still a top 10 fighter in this division, ranked in the world, he's coming off a sensational knockout win over Dillian White, yet another top 10 fighter ranked in the world. This is a guy that Anthony Joshua took care of some years ago. And that is the kind of victory that in hindsight adds to a fighter's legacy, because in hindsight you can say this fighter left no stone unturned. There aren't very many, if any, fighters in that fighter's era that he didn't fight. This ain't the same thing as being ordered to fight Dillian White by the WBC
And blowing them off.
so that you can fight a hand-picked opponent, a hand-picked Otto Wallin, who at that time was nowhere near as proven as Dillian White. He wasn't ranked in the top 10 ranked standings of the heavyweight division then, and he still isn't now. And this is who Tyson Fury decided to fight instead of fighting Dillian White, who he was so ordered to fight by the WBC. Can you imagine the kind of criticism that Anthony Joshua would face if he so decided to skip out on a mandatory challenger, someone who the alphabets ordered him to fight so that he could fight a handpick?
Ranked nowhere in the top 10.
It's just not how Anthony Joshua operates. He takes care of his mandatory challengers, regardless of who they are, whether they're as formidable as Alexander Povetkin, Carlos Takam, Kubrat Pulev,
Who were all top 10 fighters, and some still are.
I don't expect Anthony Joshua to suddenly adopt Tyson Fury's opportunist mindset. I expect that if Usyk makes it past Derek Chisora in their fight, if and when that fight comes off, I expect that Anthony Joshua will satisfy him as his mandatory challenger, provided Usyk makes it through in good fashion and wants the shot and pushes for it, because Usyk's tune, it hasn't changed. He has no intention of stepping aside.
And that's why they're telling AJ to vacate.
Put simply, vacating a title, that might make sense to Tyson Fury, but what makes sense for Tyson Fury might not make sense for Anthony Joshua, because it is inconsistent with his character and his goals. Anthony Joshua, from the very beginning, said he wants all the belts, and that quest, that goal, hasn't changed. He wanted the WBC title when Wilder was in possession of it, and he still wants it now. That it's changed hands, and it's currently in possession of Tyson Fury.
I don't think he's going to vacate anything.
In other news, Showtime's Stephan Espinoza says, if Canelo becomes available, we'll be very aggressive to sign him. Showtime Sports president Stephan Espinoza would embrace the possibility of a reunion with Canelo in the future. We'd love to. We're proud of the time we spent with Canelo, Espinoza said to Forbes. We did some important fights in his career, and we helped launch him as a pay-per-view attraction in the U.S. We'd love to be in business with him again. We're obviously going to respect his existing contracts. We're not going to run afoul on that. If there's a time when he's available, we'll be very aggressive. We have a lot to offer, but the time to pursue that is only after it's clear he's contractually able to do so. There haven't been any conversations. As soon as there's some clarity, we'd love to have the discussion. Clarity is what's been missing from Canelo Alvarez's career as of late. Clarity as far as when and where can we expect to see this man in the squared circle again, against who, and whether or not he should even still be thought of as a Golden Boy Promotions fighter who fights on the DAZN platform. We know that Canelo Alvarez is
Pretty pissed off.
in the midst of a legal battle. He wants to be freed from his existing obligations, contractual obligations, to Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN, as he feels they're not holding up their end of the bargain. But we also know that Canelo Alvarez's lawsuit has been dismissed in its current form, and he has a deadline. He has until September 28th to amend the suit. That's roughly 1 week's time. Not this Monday, but next Monday. As it was previously reported, this has to do with his lawyers categorizing Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN as corporations as opposed to LLCs, limited liability companies. And on that front, we haven't heard much new news, encouraging or otherwise. Is Canelo going to follow up and amend the suit, or will these three parties sit down and try to smooth out the rough edges, see if they can't reach amicable terms to give everybody what they want from the deal? We just don't know. Stephan Espinoza wants to let it be known that if things don't work out between Canelo, Golden Boy, and DAZN, Canelo Alvarez has an alternative. He can find a home on Showtime. But would going to Showtime satisfy Canelo Alvarez's demands? Canelo Alvarez has every intention of making $35 million a fight, you understand. But the platforms and how they operate to pay the fighters is different. You know, DAZN is a subscription-based platform, and Canelo Alvarez is guaranteed, at least based on what he knows, a certain amount of money that he is demanding. On Showtime, things would work a little differently. I've no doubts that Showtime has every intention of billing Canelo Alvarez's fights as pay-per-view attractions, pay-per-view events.
Per usual.
But on pay-per-view, they're not going to guarantee this guy $35 million, you understand? They're going to guarantee him a nominal amount in the hope of the fans generating the rest of the cash, the rest of the stretch. For example, Canelo Alvarez's guaranteed purse in what has been one of his biggest fights to date,
Yeah, I know.
the Gennady Golovkin fight, his guaranteed purse for that fight was nowhere near $35 million guaranteed. It wasn't 30, it wasn't 25, it wasn't even 20. His guaranteed purse for the fight was $5 million, with an upside of the pay-per-view, of course. Undoubtedly, the lion's share, as Canelo Alvarez was the A-side fighter in that fight. But you'll notice that the guarantee, what he's guaranteed to take home, $5 million, that's nowhere near what he's guaranteed on DAZN. The kind of money that he's looking for, $35 million per fight. On Showtime, they're not going to guarantee that this guy takes home $35 million. They're going to guarantee him a nominal amount of money in the hopes that the rest of the money he hopes to make comes directly from the fans' pockets. Now, in order for a guy to generate $35 million, just generate it on a pay-per-view, you'd have to sell about 437,000 pay-per-views at approximately $80 a pop. And of that $35 million, you're not taking all of that home.
No way.
A sizable chunk of that $35 million is going to go to the costs it took to stage the event in the first place, i.e., the break-even point. And that's basically saying that in order for the fighter to go home with $35 million,
Well,
he's got to generate well in excess of 437,000 pay-per-view buys at $80 a pop. You're looking at, I don't know, maybe 500, 600,000 pay-per-view buys, maybe more, for a fighter to take home $35 million. The question then becomes, would Canelo Alvarez have gotten $35 million? Would he have went home with $35 million for the Rocky Fielding fight, the Daniel Jacobs fight, or the Sergey Kovalev fight if those fights had taken place on a Showtime pay-per-view as opposed to being staged on the DAZN platform? Would Canelo Alvarez have made that kind of scratch if those were pay-per-views on Showtime? And I think we all know the answer to that question. The answer to that question is no. You know, Daniel Jacobs, Sergey Kovalev, those were solid opponent choices for what it's worth. They were. But fighting those guys on a Showtime pay-per-view that's billed at $80 a pop, that ain't gonna get you 4, 5, 600,000 pay-per-view buys. Sergey Kovalev appeared on pay-per-view 2 times before locking horns with Canelo Alvarez, and those pay-per-views, not a single one of them broke 200,000 pay-per-view buys. And that was an unbeaten Sergey Kovalev. At the height of his career, the Sergey Kovalev that Canelo Alvarez fought was viewed by some, though not all, as damaged goods. A guy who was past it. You know, Daniel Jacobs, another solid fighter, no doubt about it, a world champion at the time that he locked horns with Canelo, fighting that guy on a Showtime pay-per-view wouldn't have brought in 600, 700,000 pay-per-view buys. No way. And essentially what I'm getting at is that if Canelo Alvarez by some chance is released from his existing contract with Golden Boy Promotions and he finds himself a network and promotional free agent, should he cross over to the Showtime side of things, I'm sure they'd be happy to have him, but he ain't gonna be making $35 million a fight.
you can forget that fucking shit.
Whatever Canelo Alvarez would stand to make would be contingent on what interest the fight drums up. And in order to take home $35 million, you're going to need some super fights. Not a Rocky Fielding, not a Sergey Kovalev, and not a Daniel Jacobs. It would take fights on the scale of the 2 Golovkin fights that Canelo Alvarez had in order to take home that amount of money, the amount of money that he's supposed to be guaranteed via DAZN. And right now, no one at either 160 or 168 pounds has quite the buzz that Gennady Golovkin had going into those Canelo fights. So, in theory, Canelo could decide to go to Showtime if he is released from his contract with Golden Boy. But if he goes to the Showtime side of things, I can tell you, he ain't going to be making what he hoped to have been making on DAZN.